Hello everyone, welcome back for more HOA Karen tales. Picture yourself rousing from sleep at 2 a.m. hearing the sound of metal grinding inside your garage. You flick the light switch only to discover your HOA president standing there armed with a crowbar, attempting to break into your vehicle. At the same time, she is on the line with 911 claiming that you stole her car. Let's jump straight into the video. And the headline story begins as follows. I reside in a district that is governed by an HOA. I was raised in this very house that I currently inhabit. There are numerous reasons why, but my primary two are that firstly, real estate is incredibly pricey at the moment, and secondly, I wish to be close to my parents to look after them. Naturally, since they still reside here, the most logical choice for me was to remain at this residence. I am not a freeloader or anything of the sort, to be clear. I cover my expenses and look after myself, but anyway, that is not the issue. The issue is, I have been residing here my entire life. I adore this community. Everybody is so amazingly welcoming and encouraging of one another. I truly would not exchange the folks I grew up alongside and who live near me now for anything. Since I was a child, this neighborhood has operated under an HOA. I never really gave it much thought because the association never really created any issues. From what I could recall, they were generally quite helpful, always ensuring any community matters were settled, repairing physical issues like potholes, and just generally verifying that everyone in the district was doing well. However, lately, there has been a major issue with the HOA. The most significant issue was honestly regarding the president. Every 2 years the board is rotated and replaced, ensuring that fresh faces are granted an opportunity to get involved in the HOA. Recently, this woman who we shall refer to as Karen was elected as the president. She had been attempting to run for several years, but every time another candidate was selected over her. But finally, this time she managed to secure the presidency. Instantly, matters began to deteriorate. Karen became exceptionally authoritarian and began fining residents for regulations that didn't even exist. She would consistently utilize her newfound authority as HOA president to intimidate people. If a person was doing something she didn't fancy, even if it was an activity that likely wasn't even dangerous to anyone, she would attempt to use her position as the president to force them to cease. For instance, some children were playing in the street, as children frequently do, and they were not being careless or anything. They were literally just playing in their own yards. She threatened them and their guardians with penalties and fees if they didn't quiet down. She has even had conflict with me on occasion. She has attempted to phone the police on me numerous times for idiotic reasons. I don't recall every detail, but one particular event I do remember was when she called the law on me regarding where I was parked. I was positioned on the street directly in front of my home, which is entirely lawful. Karen alleged that I was parked in a red curb zone, but when the officers showed up, they verified that there was no red curb and no parking prohibition on that road. Despite that, Karen still dialed the police on me. And after they realized that I hadn't committed any offense, they offered me an apology and instructed Karen to relax. I was genuinely shocked that, considering how frequently she called them for non-emergencies, they hadn't issued her a caution regarding misusing 911 or squandering police assets. As you can gather, she is not the most excellent president. Lately, I purchased a fresh vehicle for myself. It is nothing overly extravagant. I certainly cannot manage the cost of any luxury automobiles. And I mean, I had been operating my parents' vintage Toyota Camry for quite a while. It is a vehicle that I have been driving since I obtained my license. I was 18 at that time, and now I am 32, so picture that. I cherish that car, and I truly drove it until the wheels practically detached. But it had reached a stage where I could barely utilize it. The AC and heating didn't function. The ignition occasionally didn't engage for minutes at a time. And I had so many miles on the darn thing. I determined that it was finally time to retire the Camry and acquire a different car in its stead. Fortunately, I had some funds set aside. So, after a little bit of browsing, I finally decided on a newer model Toyota Highlander. I always enjoyed driving larger vehicles, even though I was so accustomed to the Camry. So, this was an enjoyable shift. I donated the Camry and naturally began driving around in the Highlander. A couple of weeks later, I noticed that Karen purchased the exact same Highlander. Now, the Toyota Highlander is a quite frequent, popular car, so it wasn't exactly odd to see that Karen had also acquired a new Highlander. But not only was it the identical model, it was also the same color, and I was certain that it possessed the same specs, as well. Not only that, though, it was also even stranger because she and her household do not typically drive Toyotas. That entire residence is filled with Hondas. As bizarre as it was, however, I didn't really think anything of it until the entire situation unfolded. About 3 or 4 weeks after Karen had purchased her vehicle, the break-in occurred at my residence. In retrospect, I believe she required that time to make her scheme appear legitimate. If she had reported her automobile stolen the very same week she bought it, that would have been dubious. She likely waited long enough to make it appear like a genuine theft could have occurred. Anyway, I am typically awake very late, but I keep all my lights extinguished since I am usually scrolling on my phone or reading a book with a small light. I know it is a poor habit, but do not judge. I heard a great deal of commotion emanating from downstairs, so I instantly rushed down to observe what was happening. I was particularly anxious since my parents are in their 60s, and if something were to occur, I would be their sole line of defense. Looking back, I was sort of a fool for this because I didn't possess anything to defend myself if something truly terrible had transpired. Even so, I went down regardless. The rustling was extremely loud and sounded like someone was scratching at metal or something similar. I flipped on all the lights downstairs and checked the kitchen and living room. After I verified everything was mostly okay downstairs, I tracked the sound into the garage. I unlatched the door and flipped on the switch to see Karen holding a crowbar, looking like she had been attempting to pry open my car door. There were indentations in the door frame where she had been trying to lever it open, and the paint was scraped up quite severely around the lock section. I instantly began shouting at her and instructing her to set the crowbar down, asking what on earth she was doing inside my home. She replied that I should not even attempt anything and that she had already dialed the police and that they were en route to arrest me. Even in that instant, I found that supremely humorous or at least ironic because I kept debating with her, asking why she would be the person calling the authorities if she is the one who broke into my residence. Because Karen reported it as a robbery in progress, the officers arrived quite rapidly to manage the scenario. This portion made me anxious because they showed up fast with multiple units, and I wasn't certain what Karen had told them. Nevertheless, I kept my hands in plain sight and obeyed everything they requested immediately because I didn't want any confusion here when they were reacting to what they believed was a crime in progress. The police arrived and separated us instantly. Karen was outside screaming about how I had stolen her vehicle while I attempted to clarify that she had broken into my home. Due to how hysterically she was behaving and the entire crowbar circumstance, they requested I come down to the station to resolve everything while they investigated. I was not formally under arrest at that stage, but they desired statements from everyone involved. I cooperated quite readily because I knew I had not committed any wrong and wanted to get this mess cleared up. When they interviewed me at the precinct, I clarified that they had been summoned to my house, not Karen's, and that I had woken up to Karen breaking into my garage with a crowbar and attempting to break into my vehicle. Understandably, the police were extremely doubtful of me. They likely assumed that I was fabricating that to try and escape the whole predicament. The positive thing was, however, that they were slightly more prone to believe me since, well, Karen had a reputation at this specific station for being the woman who calls for idiotic reasons and non-emergencies. And fortunately, my parents were also being interviewed since they were inside the house during the break-in. And they were vouching for me and maintained that I was not the intruder, but rather Karen was. They verified that this was our residence, that I resided there, and that Karen had no business being inside our garage. Because my parents were insisting that their home was mine and supporting my account, the officers finally began to believe me a bit more and eventually questioned Karen about it. Reportedly, after some back and forth, she finally confessed that she had been breaking into my house, but only to retrieve her car because I had supposedly stolen it from her. She even displayed photographs of her own identical Highlander, trying to assert that the vehicle in my garage was in fact hers. According to what the officers told me subsequently, she claimed that her car had been snatched from her driveway and that I must have placed it in my garage. She insisted they inspect her driveway to demonstrate that her car was missing. When the police went to confirm her tale, they discovered her Highlander sitting in her driveway precisely where she usually parks it. At that stage, they realized her narrative made no sense, but they still had to verify ownership via the VIN and registration to completely eliminate any chance of a confusion. The police brought this data back to me. But I insisted that the automobile was mine and not Karen's. And so the police investigated further. They ran the VIN through their database and checked my registration and title documents that I had stored in the house. Within roughly 20 minutes, they verified the car was registered to me and had been acquired by me weeks before Karen even purchased hers. The purchase dates via records and all the paperwork demonstrated that I was speaking the truth. Now that they proved that I was innocent, they attempted to extract the truth from Karen, but she kept insisting that she was in the right and that I was the crazy one here. From what I gathered, she began insulting the police officers since they were starting to turn against her and believe my version of the story. Ultimately, Karen was charged with trespassing and attempted burglary due to the crowbar and her effort to break into my vehicle. Regrettably, she didn't serve any time in jail, though. She just paid a penalty and was let go. Now, here is where you might assume the tale would conclude, but no, it only deteriorated. The story circulated around the neighborhood. Everyone's business is frankly everywhere, so I was not astonished by it, but I had only informed a few individuals. I didn't really mind if anyone knew since it was not as if the situation was humiliating for me or that I was in the wrong or something, but I was just amazed at how rapidly it had all spread. Due to the embarrassment from that entire incident, whatever issue Karen had with me only intensified even further. She started mailing me violation notices for actions I didn't even commit, claiming my grass was over 4 in tall when I had literally just mowed it to about 2.5 inches. That my vehicle was parked improperly when it was fine, charging me fees for noise violations that didn't even exist. The violations were persistent and absurd. And when I attempted to confront the HOA board regarding it, Karen just sent me additional violation notices with fabricated infractions. She was essentially generating fake violations to fine me continuously and separate from the standard HOA dues that everybody pays. I preserved all the documents and notices she gave me and cross-referenced them with actual HOA bylaws and regulations. I even compared them to violation notices other neighbors had received previously, and it was apparent that she was concocting new fees and infractions just to target me out of malice. At a certain point, she had trespassed once more. This was less intense than the initial time, however. What transpired was I was in my backyard and my backyard possesses grass. So, naturally, I was taking the time to mow the lawn because I didn't want any overgrowth. And in the midst of my mowing session, I began hearing shouting from behind me. It was Karen. Mind you, I have a large fence that stops people from entering my backyard. But to be fair, I had it unlocked because I had just mowed the front lawn as well. But that didn't grant her a right to walk onto my property and begin screaming at me uninvited. She shouted at me that I was being too noisy and that I was violating HOA policy for doing so. Our HOA does possess a policy against loud noises, but it was not as if I was mowing my lawn at 3 o'clock in the morning. It was 2 o'clock in the afternoon on a Saturday, which is a totally reasonable time to mow your lawn in my view. However, this time I retrieved my phone and began filming her, and I threatened to phone the police on her for trespassing once more. That managed to get her off my property quite rapidly. At this stage, however, Karen's harassment had been proceeding for 2 months since the break-in event, and I determined that I finally had enough. My parents were stressed out by this scenario, too, since we were constantly managing these bogus violation notices, and Karen was practically targeting our entire household by now. Fortunately, I was already one step ahead. So, I had recorded the encounter I had with Karen in my backyard and had been retaining all the mail violation notices and letters that Karen had been dispatching to us. As stated previously, I had already been maintaining records of these fake violations and fines since I had legitimate notices from prior to the incident and could contrast them to what she was sending me now. I decided to let Karen continue her antics for one additional month just to accumulate even more proof before I finally assembled my case. I decided to file a formal harassment complaint with the authorities. Since I possessed all of my required documentation, the video recording, the violation notices, the comparison demonstrating the fabricated fees, and the police station was already cognizant of the stunts Karen would pull, the police were quite quick to take it seriously and actually do something about it. They had already been contacted by other residents who stated they were undergoing similar targeted attacks by Karen. Multiple individuals in the neighborhood had filed complaints regarding her conduct. What was even wilder though was what was occurring on the Facebook group for our HOA. Now I personally don't utilize Facebook much. I am a member of that group though, but I haven't used Facebook in so long that it removed itself from my phone to conserve storage since all the announcements we would require anyway are sent via email, which I check for more frequently. I didn't really care much about staying active on there. So I only discovered Karen's Facebook posts because one of my neighbors who is quite active in the group forwarded me screenshots after the police got involved. She said she thought I ought to see what Karen had been publishing about me and others in the district. For the preceding few months, Karen had been posting rants on the Facebook group regarding disrespectful neighbors, individuals who don't observe rules, and making thinly veiled accusations about specific houses, including mine, based on the descriptions she provided. She even posted items like, "Some people in this neighborhood think they are above the law," meaning herself, with angry emojis and lengthy paragraphs about how certain residents were destroying the community. As president, this was totally unprofessional and breached the HOA's own code of conduct regarding board members' behavior. I was at my job though when the final showdown occurred. My neighbor subsequently told me what transpired there. So, 2 officers came to Karen's door and confronted her regarding all the harassment complaints, the fake violations she had been distributing, and naturally, her Facebook posts. In the midst of the discussion, though, she started going on one of her bizarre tangents and becoming increasingly agitated. She even began threatening the officers, stating things like, "You have no idea who you're dealing with, and I know the chief personally. You'll be fired by tomorrow." And reportedly even said something about ensuring they paid for this. My neighbor stated it was genuinely frightening how unhinged she sounded due to the verbal threats she was making in the moment along with the documented harassment. The police arrested her right there. From what I heard via the neighborhood grapevine after Karen threatened the cops. They arrested her but then called for an ambulance because she was acting so erratic. My neighbors said they ended up transporting her to the hospital instead of jail because the officers were worried about her mental condition. I later discovered from someone else in the neighborhood that she was placed on some type of mandatory psychiatric evaluation hold. I believe it is called a 5,150 or something similar in some states, though I am not certain what it is called here precisely. But whatever it was, she couldn't simply depart the hospital on her own. After assessment at the hospital, she was retained for treatment for a while. Because the HOA and specifically the board received such a negative reputation due to Karen's actions and all the complaints that had accumulated, they decided to remove her from the board completely. They convened an emergency meeting and voted her out, and they sent out an apology email to everyone in the neighborhood and stated that they would be reviewing all the violation notices and fines that Karen had issued over the preceding several months. They ended up refunding the extra money that Karen had compelled us and other residents to pay through her fabricated violations, which I am truly happy about. It took roughly 6 weeks to process everything. They had to examine the violations Karen had issued and verify which ones were legitimate versus made up, recalculate the totals, and get board approval for the reimbursements. Ultimately though, we received a check in the mail for all those bogus penalties. And yes, it has been a stressful few months, but I am glad that someone finally did something about it. To this day though, I still don't really comprehend the full scope of Karen's fixation with me specifically, but the car issue makes much more sense now looking back. A few neighbors informed me that after the break-in incident, Karen had been ranting on this HOA Facebook group about how I had escaped with something and how she was going to demonstrate what kind of person I truly am. One neighbor even stated that Karen had mentioned she was going to catch me in the act before she purchased her Highlander. It seems quite evident now that she bought the identical car specifically to frame me. She likely planned to report hers stolen and claimed that mine was actually hers all along. It is genuinely unhinged behavior, but it is the only explanation that makes sense for why she would purchase the exact same make, model, color, and specs as mine when her entire family drives Hondas. Thankfully, the HOA is far better now that Karen has been removed and substituted with someone much more reasonable. The new HOA president actually observes the rules and does not arrest people. Hopefully nothing of the sort occurs again anytime soon, because I don't think I could endure going through that whole mess a second time. And the subsequent one is a petty revenge story that is titled, "A Year Ago I Got to Give My Mother's Husband a Taste of His Own Actions." So my stepfather is the filthiest person ever. He left hair all over the bathroom, took a bath and didn't clean up after, left pee stains all over the toilet seat and bathroom floor, and would sometimes take a poop and not flush. I got weary of having to clean the bathroom before utilizing it every morning. So, I started off lightly with sending a photo of his poop to my mom every time he didn't flush. When he left hair all over the bathroom, I cleaned the hair with his toothbrush and finished off with a clean wipe using his face cloth. Every time he left pee stains, I used his face cloth to wipe it and hang it without washing it. When he took a bath and left without cleaning, I used his face cloth to wipe the majority of the dirt. He woke up every day grumbling that his face cloth smelled strange and his toothbrush had hair. And of course, we all dismissed it. After 2 solid weeks, he started behaving and keeping the bathroom clean. Everything was okay when I departed, but I recently returned from college to find him back to his old habits. So, I'll be continuing with my work along with a new few tricks. I hope this time he will learn to be clean. And now let's proceed to the next story. It begins like this. A while back, my town had a tornado touchdown and caused some pretty massive damage to our neighborhood. By the time everything was finished, my house was demolished and I had to rebuild it. I was not the only person with this issue, and I got displaced because of it either. Thankfully, the people in my neighborhood are wonderful, and we all had a place to stay while homes got repaired and rebuilt. You would assume that the HOA would want to assist, but they seemed to just disappear after the tornado and didn't reappear until the efforts of rebuilding were underway. I don't think they wanted to get roped into actually aiding the community because that might damage their profits. God forbid an organization established to help people residing here actually did so. I figured that if I was going to rebuild my home, I was going to bring it up to modern-day standards. It was originally constructed nearly 100 years ago, and almost all of it was originally from then. It would be nice to have windows that are not so thin they might as well not exist, or a roof that wasn't made from old materials and leaked every single time that it rained. The insurance company paid out a substantial amount, and as long as I used it to fix their house, I could rebuild how I desired. That to me included having things be a lot more modern than it was beforehand. I did not want anything crazy like heated floors or to be able to control the temperature with my phone. But being able to have the entire home warm when it's cold out and cool when it's hot would be nice, to have an oven that worked easier and windows that were double-paned glass instead of the thin sheet that barely did anything. The most significant change I was making was to my roof. It seemed like every single year the electric bill got higher and higher, no matter how careful I was to save electricity. I did not leave things on when I wasn't in the room, but it didn't matter. I wanted to get one of those roofs that had solar panels attached to it, so I didn't need to bother with an electric company. I would be getting my energy right from the sun and could use as much as I desired without wasting resources. Once the plans for my house rebuild were submitted to the town, the HOA got their hands on it and were able to halt my project immediately. I was furious because I just wanted to fix my home and have a place to live again. The plans were approved by the town, just not the HOA, who had some words for me. HOA, you cannot do all of this crap. The HOA requires you to rebuild your house exactly as it was before. Me, you want me to match a 100-year-old house? Exactly. So, single-pane windows that don't even get made anymore? I meant to just magically get them. The house was ancient and I'm bringing it up to date. The HOA should be happy about a house getting an improvement. Instead, though, the HOA said, you cannot have those solar panels on the roof. We can overlook some of the other violations if you get a normal roof like you had before. Me, there's nothing in the bylaws about solar panels. Thank you for your concern about my home. I was being sarcastic if that was not obvious from the comment, but I was right that I had nothing saying solar panels were not allowed, mainly due to the fact the bylaws were old and solar panels are more of a newer type of thing. I got the building of my house resumed and figured they had moved on to bother somebody else that wanted their home rebuilt. Once it was done, I loved it and then started receiving fines in the mail from the HOA. They claimed the building of my house, specifically the solar panels, was against the HOA rules and wanted me to pay the fines and remove them. I was refusing and at this point had enough of the HOA starting problems with me. If they wanted a fight, I was about to give them a massive one. After refusing to pay the fines that totaled around $32,000, I ended up in court with the HOA trying to make a judge force me to pay them the money. I explained the situation and that part of the fines were for my house not being built the same as it was 100 years ago and instead being updated. The judge said, "You are heavily overreaching. What you have the power to do is insist that the style of home remains the same after rebuilding. A 3-story house not being turned into a ranch. I can even see an argument for rebuilding a house that is in worse condition and lowering the value of other properties here. He seems to want to improve his home and make changes that are needed. HOA, what about the solar panels? Those are not needed and make their house uglier, lowering the value. We don't allow them and he ignored us and did it anyway." Me, our state introduced an eco-friendly bill and part of that said that any homeowner was allowed to make modifications that were environmentally friendly and I believe that my solar panels fall under that protection and a state bill should hold more power than an HOA rule that doesn't even exist. Basically, the judge sided with me and the HOA was beyond pissed that I was not going to get rid of them or have to give them any money. Taking me to court was the final straw and I decided that I was going to get some revenge and destroy them. There was no way I was the only home they were bothering about rebuilding. So, I went around and asked to find that almost everybody negatively affected by the tornado had started to receive some kind of fine for small things or rules that did not even exist. The next time there was a community meeting, I had plenty to say and nobody was going to be able to shut me up. Me, the HOA is meant to help the community, but the only thing our board did during a time of crisis was try to profit. I lost my entire house. And instead of trying to help me, they tried to fine me for money. Money that I needed in order to pay for my house being rebuilt. If they are supposed to help the community, then why are they the ones taking advantage of us after a crisis? I think that an HOA should help us and not take advantage. Other people got up and told stories of what the HOA had recently done to them. One person was getting fined because they were not able to paint their new house the same color as before since it was discontinued. Another one got fined for letting a family of 4 that lost their home live with them. Apparently breaking the rules by having 2 families be in one home. Everybody was angry now and I was smirking and knew that I had backed them into a corner. The entire board was forced to step down from their positions and new leaders took over. These people actually cared and wanted to use the HOA to make the neighborhood better. It turns out that the HOA had an emergency fund that would have helped people who lost their homes. But the old board did not use it. Instead, they were hoarding the money for themselves. This new HOA cared and once they got the ball rolling, started to use the money to help people that were still struggling to rebuild or have a consistent place to stay. Meanwhile, I was boasting about my solar panels and all the money I was saving from them, prompting more people to get them, which I'm sure just made the old HOA board furious, but made me happy as a clam. And the next one is another petty revenge story that you don't want to miss. It is titled, "I rage baited a colleague in Reddit comments when he treats me badly." So, one of my colleagues is a huge fan of a well-known kids book series and frequently talks about getting into discussions about it with people on Reddit. And because I'm on Reddit a lot, one day I realized that I'm looking at a post he was talking about earlier in the day and I found his account by accident. And yeah, he's not a terrible person, and I would go as far as to consider him a friend, but occasionally he will do something stupid or ridiculously dumb or hurtful. For example, one day he decided to mock my disability in the office kitchen. He's really prickly and doesn't take well to feedback on his behavior. And unfortunately, he's one of the most senior guys in my company that I have to directly work with. So, I cannot afford to alienate him at work. And to be honest, I don't want to. Most of the time, he's a solid, fun guy and actually an ally who backed up my needs multiple times, but he also just happens to occasionally be a dick. As much as I don't care to get into a fight with him, every now and then I need to let out my bitterness and anger in some way. So anyway, for the past few months, when I feel like I need to, I check his Reddit profile to see if he's made any recent comments or posts and then reply to him from an alt account saying something preposterously incorrect. Imagine asking, why didn't they just call the stormtroopers on a Star Trek subreddit? And well, he is so incredibly attached to the books that he cannot stop himself from having an endless argument with my alt account. And I can't help but enjoy the thought of giving him a mild annoyance on a random Tuesday. As a cherry on top, more often than not, he will moan to me about it at work as well, often days after the interaction. And whilst he's explaining in detail how exactly some idiot on the internet was wrong, I'm standing there barely containing my laughter and petty joy. And yeah, guys, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed the stories and I will see you again.